Joining us, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree, MS Now co-host of The Weekend and the Clock It podcast, Eugene Daniels, and senior legal affairs reporter at Politico, Josh Gerstein. Lisa, I will start with you. So why fire Bondi now?
I don't know, Antonia, if I can answer the question of why fire Bondi on April 2nd, 2026. But I can tell you the pressure to get rid of Pam Bondi has been mounting in the MAGA sphere for some time. And of course, there are lots of criticisms of Pam Bondi coming from all corners of the political spectrum. Let's start with Pam Bondi's handling of the Epstein files, which our colleagues Carol Leonnig and Ken Dilanian have reported were part, at least, of the president's motivation to fire Pam Bondi. Sense on his part was that she had been tremendously ineffective as a public spokesperson with respect to the handling, but also in terms of internally what went on. You'll recall that last February of 2025, Pam Bondi came out and said the Epstein files were on her desk for review. She made a big hullabaloo about releasing some of the files to a number of influencers who walked away with binders, excited to read them, and then thought, oh, wait.
Nothing new in here.
Correct. Everything in here is in the public domain. And then, of course, the criticism has only grown with respect to the handling of the recent release of the files, something that may have been prevented if the Department of Justice had handled their much publicized internal review and investigation, which they took on their own volition at the beginning of this Trump presidency. Had that gone a little bit differently, had they not said in July in a 3-page unsized memo, essentially, there's nothing more for us to release because there are no further investigations, much less prosecutions, that we could predicate on what we have. If they hadn't done that, would we even be in a situation where the Epstein Files Transparency Act went from the mere fantasy of a couple of members of Congress to being a full-blown reality that the president was essentially forced to sign? No one knows that, but Pam Bondi got the lion's share of the blame for that, and also for the department's failure to indict many of the people that the president has publicly signaled, including through what looked like private messages to Pam Bondi on X, right? He had publicly signaled he wanted a number of people investigated and prosecuted, with the single exception of Congresswoman LaMonica MacIver, who is still sort of going through her case, cannot escape that indictment yet. All of those have not come to a place where we can see an indictment materialize and stick. There may be a number of investigations still underway, and indeed, I and other colleagues at MS Now know about a number of those investigations that seem to be still happening. But as we sit here again on April 2nd, 2026, have any of them gotten to a point where people that the president believes have committed crimes are under indictment? No. Adam Schiff is not. Jim Comey is not. Letitia James is not. Lisa Cook is not. And the list goes on and on, Antonia.
Tish James, it seems they're now trying to find another route to go after her after attempting with mortgage fraud to do an insurance fraud investigation here. But, to that point, Tom, I'm wondering if you could speak to some of the pressure that Bondi has been under on when it comes to the sort of political prosecution side, the president's interest in retribution, because that desire has been there since the start of this administration. At the same time, it's hard to blame Bondi for those things falling apart, because if the reality is that there's no there, is it really Bondi's fault if those prosecutions have not been able to go through?
Well, look, the position of Attorney General is a cabinet position that the president cares very much about. During the campaign, he made clear that kind of using the Justice Department as a way to go after people that he thought had treated him unfairly was going to be a top priority if he returned to office. That's what happened, and that is what he wants to see. So Bondi's departure, unlike the departures of Trump's two prior attorney generals in his first term, Sessions and then Bill Barr, who basically left kind of under bad conditions because of what the president perceived as a lack of loyalty, here Bondi's departure is due to what the president perceives as a lack of effectiveness. But as you noted, the attorney general can only do so much. At the end of the day, a prosecution is going to rise or fall based on the law and based on the evidence. And there are other people in the system, judges, juries, grand juries, who have a say in the process. And even the most skilled and talented attorney general can't force a jury to convict if the jury doesn't think the evidence is there. So viewed through that lens, Pam Bondi was in a difficult spot. She wanted to carry out the president's priorities, but the law, the evidence didn't enable her to move as quickly and as successfully as the president believes she should.
Eugene, I want your thoughts on who may take her place. Of course, we have her deputy, Todd Blanche, now acting as Attorney General. And if you're just talking about Epstein, the reality is he was out front on that story, at times even more than she was. So I'm not sure how he escapes the blame or the fallout from that. We also know from our colleagues reporting that Pirro, Schmidt, Zeldin, and others are on the short list right now. What are you watching for, Eugene?
Well, I mean, let's not forget, Blanche the other day at CPAC said, why wouldn't you want ICE at polling locations? So that is something that Donald Trump wants. So if you pay attention to the way that he's talking, it feels a little different than it has in the past and much more in line with Donald Trump. I mean, this whole list of people, these are lawyers, these are legal folks, these are some of them with differing levels of respect from the legal community. I'm sure Elisa knows that better than I. But at the end of the day, it almost doesn't matter. And this goes across the cabinet. At the end of the day, Donald Trump, and maybe depending on what the issue is, someone like the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, they are calling the shots, right? Same thing with DHS when he got rid of Kristi Noem out of that job. It was because she wasn't doing what he wanted to, but the kinds of things that he is asking these folks to do are sometimes, according to judges, not me, illegal. And more importantly, are operating in a world, a political world that just like doesn't actually exist in the one that we live in. And he doesn't believe in separation of power. So you can be the figurehead of these organizations. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump and some folks at the White House are going to be the ones that are going to be running those organizations across the administration. And frankly, if Donald Trump had his way, across the government. There are a few things, if you take a job from Donald Trump, we should all know this, that you have to accept and kind of acknowledge as you move forward. One, he's always right. Right. Everything he says is right. And every decision that he makes, you have to move on. You are not in charge of your own agency. You can't outshine the boss. Steve Bannon found that out the hard way in the first term. And don't embarrass the boss. And what you have with Pam Bondi is from the very beginning, as Lisa laid out, he embarrassed the boss by saying that she had a client list on her desk. She handed out those documents to those influencers at the White House, I might add. And then she's failed to do in his mind what he is at the top of his list, which is get these indictments, throw some people in jail that he sees as his enemies. And so it doesn't really matter who the next person is, because at the end of the day, Donald Trump will be making the decisions and calls. And I think we should all sit with the idea that is something we have all kind of accepted, that the president of the United States will be, no matter who is the head of the DOJ, be running the DOJ essentially.
Josh, Bondi is supposed to testify under oath in just a matter of days. Will this get her out of that responsibility?
I mean, as a technical matter, it doesn't. It might be the case that Congress might decide to give up on that, given that she left. I mean, I do know that the White House was not happy with her last outing on this subject on Capitol Hill, where she answered questions at a oversight hearing. So these are among the things that have irritated them. I think it was not simply that she mishandled the Epstein files matter, but she actually inflamed it in the ways that Lisa was describing earlier by saying and doing things that gave it additional legs. I would also add that I agree that Todd Blanche is going to be a hard person to carry the football here and claim that he had nothing to do with it. In fact, it seemed that at one point they were trying to use Todd Blanche as a kind of heat shield when it became clear that Bondi had become the focal point of anger over the Epstein files and even of the president's anger, to try to diffuse it somewhat. But Blanche has always, I think, had a bit more of a personal relationship with Trump as a result of being his defense lawyer, especially during that trial up in New York City before the last election. They really had a close bond in a way that I don't think Trump and Bondi ever did, even though she was sort of a spokesperson for him, a surrogate, if you will, during that trial.